Professor Elizabete Manterola from the University of the Basque Country. She worked on, she did her PhD on translations of Basque author Bernardo Atxaga, and her research focuses on the translation of Basque into other languages, mainly literary translations. She has published a lot of contributions on self-translation, collaborative self-translation, indirect translation, translation in diglossic environments, or the translation of Basque cinema.
Okay, good morning to everyone, once again. So, as I said, I'm participating in the research project led by Diana, and so she has given us a theoretical framework and a comparative perspective, and I will focus on one single case, which is the Basque literature and translation. And I will like to reflect also on cultural identity and diversity in this sense. So, okay. Diana has already presented the relation between literary translation and soft power, and I would just like to add some detail. Soft power can present different connotations according to the position a culture occupies in the international arena. When it comes to peripheral languages, foreign promotion appears to be a necessary strategy to compensate a lack of economic power or to counter perceived invisibility. And actions promoted by a national institute of a non-state region will have it difficult to obtain international visibility and recognition compared to other actors in more major languages. At the same time, we should bear in mind that soft power operates in the long term. So the actions promoted from public institutions, it is difficult to measure their real action in the short term. Okay. As for the types of cultures and languages involved in the literary exchange, the types of cultures and languages involved in the literary exchange condition the nature of the transfer. So dependence is a common feature of asymmetrical relations, and it shows up in different ways. The hegemonic culture may be the main source for translation or the main target language for translation into foreign languages. There may be difficulties in developing direct relations with some target languages, so intermediary languages have to intervene in this communication. There's also a lack of demand from target languages, or even lack of professional translators who can translate directly from minority languages. As for cultural identity, this is a complex notion that needs to be reflected. So when we talk about Basque culture, what are we talking about? Is it limited by language, by geographic belonging, by identity or political ascription? It is complicated. It is a complicated question, and I don't have really clear answers. So depending on the perspective, on who addresses this, on which is the research question we are dealing with, we can delimit the notion in different ways. What is important is to know that in the literary exchange, the self-perception doesn't always correspond with the image reflected abroad. That is, the identities we claim for ourselves clash with different ones attributed to us. As literary exchanges are performed from one language to another, we tend to talk about Basque literature as it would be an autonomous system, and exchanges between literatures would take place between two languages. But cultural transfers are not that simple, and the role played by major intermediaries is of vital importance, for example, in the foreign promotion. Basque coexists with Spanish and with French, as Yvonne told us earlier, and the geographical space where it is spoken is divided in 2 states and 3 administrative entities. And not all of them acknowledge the officiality of the Basque language. Its political dimension is closely related to its sociolinguistic development, which has undergone a complete transformation over the last 40 years. linguistic and cultural competences are shared by state and regional governments, and literary publishing and translation are fostered from both levels. So state actors, as the Ministry of Culture in Spain, subsidize production, publishing, and translation produced in the languages of Spain, that is Spanish, but also Catalan, Galician, and Basque. And local or regional agents, in this case the Basque government, promotes Basque culture and literature abroad. As cultural production is created in more than one language within the Basque country, these public institutions foster production not only in Basque, but also in Spanish, a characteristic that is not shared by other regional institutions in other regions in Spain with co-official languages. Okay, so I would like to examine the diversity of cultural policies carried out by Basque institutions, but first I will offer an overview of translation flows within the Basque literature. So these are some quantitative data, and we see that there are 2,500 books published per year in average, but not all of those books are literary books. Only 347 books in the year 2023, and 257 books were for children and young adults literature and literature for adults. So we see that children and young adults literature outnumber that of compared to the number of literature for adults. And fiction is the most published genre. There is also a perceptible gender imbalance among Basque authors, and only 1 out of 3 authors are women between the members of the Basque Writers Association, a proportion that has notably increased in the last decades. And as for publishers, in the year 2023, there were 300 publishers that published at least 1 book in Basque, but only 40 publishers published 10 books or more that year. And I will also like to give some quantitative data on translation into Basque and from Basque into other languages. So we see that the number of translations into Basque outnumber for 1 to 4 to 5 those translated from Basque in the period from 1980s until recently. And here is the chronological evolution for translations into Basque and from Basque into other languages. We see this in translation, or translation into Basque is more regular than the translation for foreign languages. And here we can see the target and source languages which with which Basque has literary exchanges. So the number of original and target languages is fairly balanced, with 41 source languages and 38 target languages. Although the number in each direction is relatively high, there are considerable differences among them, as we can see in the graph. So Spanish is the main source and target language, and it constitutes around 30% for translations into Basque and 50% for translations from Basque. And English is close behind the Spanish as source language, but there is a very big distance in the opposite direction. Languages can be divided in 2 groups: languages spoken within Spain and foreign languages. And the different languages of Spain are more representative in children and young adults literature than in literature for adults. And while Spanish languages cover 37% of translations into Basque, they constitute a preferential market with, in the opposite direction, in translations into other languages, with almost the 70%. Okay, as can be seen here on this slide, the tendency to publish books for adults or children literature is opposed in the 2 directions. So books for children predominate in a ratio of 1 to 4 in translation or translations into Basque, while the opposite occurs in exports, where literature for adults is the norm. And as for genres, we can see that fiction is the most translated genre. As for gender balance, we can see that for authors and for translators, female and male translators are quite balanced, although men are more numerous, except for the translation into Basque, where we can see that the number of women translators are a little bit higher. So those were some quantitative data on the translation flows we have identified, and now I will continue with the perspective of the translation policies and translations, subsidized translations into other languages. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, Basque literature can receive subsidies from regional and state institutions. So according to data gathered for this study, I saw that the exportation of Basque works is mainly promoted by regional bodies, and works written in Basque receive very few ads from the Spanish ministry. There might be different reasons for that. For example, candidates may not present projects to state calls. State calls may mainly award ads for works written in Spanish. Candidates may prefer regional bodies, or they might feel them closer, or there may be also identity reasons for that. Be it as it may, that is something that we should study more in depth, but be it as it may, the reality is that Basque books are mainly subsidized by the regional institutions. So regional institutions, in the first years, it was the Department of Culture of the Basque government who subsidized the translation into other languages, but afterwards, the Basque government established the Etxepare Basque Institute, as you may have already known. So Etxepare is the responsible to subsidize it, to promote culture and literature and culture abroad, and to subsidize and give award grants for literary translation. So here are some actions sponsored by Etxepare Basque Institute, and I will only focus on the first one. So considering the whole analyzed period from 2004 until 2020, almost 400 projects were awarded a grant for translation. This figure shows the number of works that received a grant in each year, and although the funding body offers equal opportunities for translation to books in Basque and in Spanish, figures demonstrate that literature written in Basque receives significantly more funding for translation. This is the dark gray. This table contains the target languages. So the first column is for languages to which originals in Basque were translated, and the second column is the here are the languages for which originals in Spanish were translated. So there are 29 languages in the first column and 14 in the second one. The difference between originals in Basque and Spanish doesn't only stand for the number of translations, but also between the nature of those languages. So intrastate translations are frequent for Basque, while there are no intrastate translations for the Spanish originals. And this shows general tendencies that will have to be explored in more detail and maybe compared to other programs of subsidies in other institutions. And as we can see in the first column, Spanish stands out as the main target language from Basque, with more than half of the subsidized projects, which is a very overwhelming number. As for authors, we can see the list of the main subsidized authors, as well as a graph which contains the gender of these authors. As we can see, there is a considerable gender gap among authors. Less than a third has been written by women. And in the first 10 years of the grants, the proportion of male authors was 70% or higher. But in the last editions, the grants books authored by men were around 60%. So this shows that the growing space that books written by women occupy in the grants, and that is a tendency. I mean, I think we are identifying globally. As for the list of authors, there are three elements to be considered: the number of projects they have been awarded, the number of original works, and the number of target languages into which these works have been translated. And the three parameters vary between different authors. The considerable number of translations and translated languages is an indicator of the international projection of authors, such as Bernarda Atxaga or Kirmen Uribe, while on the other hand, the low number of target languages shows a limited diffusion for authors that mainly operate intrastate. Okay. And as for translators, the balance between male and female translator is quite this is quite balanced in compared to the author's graph. And here we have also identified a big amount of missing values, and also some translations made by more than one translator. And as for the the chronological evolution of male translators and female translators is also quite similar with the authors. That means that in the last years, more female translators have been awarded a grant. And as for literary genres, all literary genres have equal opportunities to be subsidized by the funding body. The funding body doesn't set any limitation or preference to specific genres, but data demonstrate that almost 70% of the subsidized projects are fiction for adults, which is a higher proportion than the one seen in the general exports data. And children and young adults literature received only 10%, which doesn't coincide with the high percentage of books for children produced in Basque and translated into other languages. And as for some final remarks on the diversity, so the triangulation of quantitative data on production, translation, and subsidies offers a good opportunity to assess the position of Basque literature within the world translation system, and it permits us to visualize which are the preferred languages and countries, and which authors' works and genres attract more attention in target markets. As it has been observed, children and young adults' works are vital in the Basque literary system in terms of production and import. It constituted the main genre in exports some years ago, but according to most recent trends, fiction for adults is more translated into other languages. And that is also what is mainly funded by public institutions. And the number of subsidized books for children and young adults is very limited, which demonstrates that public funding is destined to more canonical works. As for the sex and gender diversity of the agents participating in the translation exchanges, data have shown that more men have received a subsidy compared to women, be it for the, Bernarda Atxaga has been the main representative of Basque literature abroad. That is something that I have already studied in my previous studies. But we see that lately the number of authors is gaining diversity. But we should also ask ourselves for how many authors is there room in target languages, how permeable are these target languages, or what effect have subsidized books in target language markets for books created originally in a minoritized language. I would also like to stress the incursion into foreign markets of female authors in recent years, as I have said before. And as for translators, the unbalance, the uneven distribution is not that pronounced. And as for the linguistic diversity, we could conclude that the number of source and target languages is extensive, although the number of translations in some languages might only be symbolic. And languages spoken in Spain and the main European languages are the most represented languages in the numbers. And translations flows are fluent mainly in intrastate level. The presence of Spanish as the main target and source language is overwhelming, as is the number of subsidized translations into that language. And this is a clear sign of dependency from Basque into, this is a clear sign of dependency that Basque has on Spanish. And okay, to finish, I would like only to say that the specificities of the language and the situation of the cultural system defines all cultural exchanges, and so and it shapes also the cultural identity that is promoted abroad and is received. Okay, and that's have been all.